Thanks ever so much for coming along this afternoon. And I thought it would be a fantastic opportunity with Father's Day on the horizon to get some dads together and have a chat about the sort of anxieties and the ups and downs of being a dad, and perhaps even give some advice to dads to be that are going to be having babies in the near future. Okay, so it might be an idea if we just introduce ourselves and say what children we've got.
Sure. My name is Fabio. I'm a dad of a 2-year-old daughter, and she's currently in nursery. I'm picking her up at 5. And yeah, it's been a journey and very lovely. I'm originally from Portugal, so we do actually go back home quite a bit and you know, like enjoy life between London and the sea in Portugal.
Lovely. Me next. Hi, my name's Johnny. I've got a son. He's 18 months, so similar in age. He's called Albie, also at nursery, also on daddy pickup duty.
Great.
And, yeah, I live in West London.
Great.
Yeah, hi, my name's Nick. I've got 2 children. I've got a daughter who's 7 years old and a son who's 5 years old. Unlike you two, I'm not on pickup duty today, but I'll take over the reins when I get home.
Brilliant.
My name is Rodrigo. I'm a dad of a boy, 3 years old, and he's a nursery. I'm also on a dad pickup duty, around 6, and I live in southwest London. And as opposed to Portugal, I'm from Brazil.
Fantastic. Well, I'm Matt, and my children are much older. So I've got 3 children ranging from 20 to 25, plus 2 stepdaughters, a 15-year-old and a 20-year-old. So I've got my hands full. I've got a 5-a-side football team, as I always say. So, and I'm not doing pickup duty at all, I can hasten to add. So, you know, obviously having a baby is a life-changing event, and I think if we all think back, some of us have to think further back than others, but we all will have had anxieties, I think, before the birth. I wonder if we could just sort of have a quick sort of chat about that. You know, what was your biggest anxiety, and did that prove to be something to worry about when the time came?
Well, for me, I think mine began a little bit before even conception. So mine always was the idea, like, will I be able to provide to my child? So financial was like a big thing in my head. And once my wife got pregnant, and then that was like, am I going to be an adequate father? Or am I going to be able to be a good role model for the child when he grow up and teach him like everything that he needs to do to survive this world? That was my biggest anxiety. And of course, after you go like to the ultrasounds and all of that, like, is he healthy?
Yes.
And that is in the back of your mind all the time until your baby's born.
How about you, Nick?
Well, yeah, you've just said exactly how I felt. I think one of the things for me was you get a lot of advice from other people that's not necessarily positive all the way throughout, and I found more often than not that some people were willing to give negative advice about the worst case scenario, and X might not happen, you might never sleep again, which half of that is true. I was always fairly confident, having being the oldest of 5, about bringing up a child, but it was all of the things that you've sort of heard and absorbed on the way, 1 or 2 of them coming true. That was my biggest concern.
That's interesting. I think there's quite a lot of that sort of negativity, and you know, I think sort of parents that have had children perhaps revel in that a bit, you know, and you know, it's really nice to hear, and I'm sure we'll hear lots of really positive stories. But we've got to be realistic as well, of course, and you know, it's not all plain sailing. But yeah, that's a really interesting take on it. Johnny.
Yeah, I mean, to Rodrigo's point, I think it's earlier than birth, but absolutely sort of health of baby and mother, you're thinking, really, you don't know the baby at that stage. Primarily for me, actually, it was like, will my wife be, like, make it through this and be totally fine? Because you're also thinking along those lines. You don't have a relationship with the baby per se at that point. The mother very much does, though, in my mind. But then actually for me it goes back to conception, and I think some of the anxieties there are very, very misunderstood, and particularly I think for dads as well, there seems to be a good social circle for mums to talk about, you know, miscarriages, for example, nowadays, and it's a lot more common to be able to talk openly about that sort of stuff. But I think also for dads, like how can they best support females more broadly, like their female friends, but also, you know, their partners or their partner in going through stuff like that. I think that for me was the hardest hitting part of the whole total process of it all in lead up. The actual birth bit, we're like, you're at the sharp end now. There's no going back. You know, let's just hope it's all going to be safe and dandy. But actually, a lot of the emotion leading up to that, I thought, was far more intense than I ever thought it was, because until you go into the process of actually thinking, I'm going to have a child, then all of that opens up of like, well, can you, and what happens if it doesn't happen safely, and then it doesn't happen, and then other stories come out of it not happening well, and blah, blah, blah. So, I mean, that's the full-on bit for me, I think, looking back.
Yeah. No, absolutely. It's, you know, it is a frightening time, and I think, you know, that certainly, you know, when I think back, you know, obviously 20 years ago or 25 years ago when I had my first child, there wasn't really that sort of support network, you know, mental health and sort of dads talking to each other. It just wasn't done. You know, we'd go to the pub, dads to be and talk about the football, but we would never talk about what we were concerned about, those sorts of concerns that you've raised there. And it's, you know, I'm pleased that that's changing, but yeah, obviously there's still a way to go.
Definitely a long way to go. Yeah, totally. I think like the NCT example is such a good one, because the mums come together, they're super active, they're talking about all sorts, they're up at 1 a.m, active on the WhatsApp. The dads group is completely dark, you know, and you do go and meet at the pub, and then what do you talk about? Like revert to football. But actually it's so much stuff you want to talk about, and maybe you will get there with like 1 or 2 people, but I think the support network is so much broader than that, because every experience is very unique, and then to draw experiences from all those different people is really important to give you your own view of things, because you can take the wrong advice very, very easily, because it's not specific to your kid.
Yeah, absolutely. And Fabio?
Yeah, I mean, to me, I think from what I remember, the most haunting thing was this idea of not being able to control anything, and in regards to the birth of my child, and this sense of almost like, you know, in power, and you can't do much about it, and you just have to be patient. And there was these moments of the scanning days where we would go to the hospital, and there would be always this concept of understanding a bit more of what was going on. And I remember in particular a day that I had to wait outside of the hospital waiting for my partner, because it was COVID time, so I couldn't get in. And there was a result that wasn't within the normal spectrum, and that got me like really nervous about the whole thing, and we started basically to overthink about, you know, what could it be, what could be the impact to the child, what could be the impact to our lives. And so it was a bit of a fight between our minds just to calm us down and to accept that you couldn't do much about that, you couldn't change it, and you know, whatever child comes, whatever the, you know, the conditions, you can't do much about it. All you need to do is be ready in terms of being ready to love, right? Being ready to basically be a good role model as much as you can. And I think that was an interesting experience, because he humbled us to become a bit more calm about things that you can't do anything about it. You know, regardless the amount of YouTube videos that you would watch of people talking about that specific problem, or it would always come down to, you know, why are you thinking about it? You just wait for that day, and then on the day it was the revealing moment. It was, you know, you just realize actually nothing really matters now. Now is when things start to actually, at least for me as a parent. Obviously, I didn't have a baby inside my body, so then I guess my role at that stage was to become a big support to my partner, so she could do the job of a mom. And there was this idea of becoming relevant in this sort of in this link of things, and so finding my relevance was a big aspect on the early stages. Yeah.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean, if we could just sort of touch on some of this, Johnny's point about support networks. I mean, obviously, Rodrigo, you've got family in Brazil, you know, so your family are a long way away, and Portugal, is that right, Fabio?
Yeah.
So, you know, and obviously in the UK as well, family can be a long way away. Who were your support network when you had worries, either before the birth or, you know, after the birth? Was it friends, or was it family, or was it really just your partner? How did that work?
Yeah, it was a mix between friends and my wife, but definitely, yeah. As a man, we've got a little bit of stereotypical, like, I don't want to share too much, or we're just going to share if we're doing something, right? So what I've done, like, contact a couple of friends of mine and like, let's go for a walk. I know you've got a couple of children, and I was just asking the questions and then getting some advice. And I've been recommended a couple of books and how to raise a boy, essentially, because I'm like, as I said, my biggest thing was like, how am I going to be able to reflect and for him to learn how to survive in this world? Because I look around myself where I live or where elsewhere, like, goodness me, you see the results of like a fatherless home and what the lack of fatherhood is actually affecting society and the new generation. So the things in your mind, and I'm like, I want to go counter this culture. I want to tackle these and then making sure that my children will be, and my child will be the one that, I had a dad that was involved, and I had a dad that was actually playing intentionally to be there with me, understanding me, and all the sort of things. And then that's where I reached out to a couple of friends, and I'm like, please help me out on this thing. Yeah.
Yeah, really important. And that sort of going for a walk as well, so good for your sort of mental health and just sort of calming yourself as well. Nick, you know, what was your experience?
I spoke to my grandmother, who brought up 3 children on her own. I went to her, my mother as well, who's a mother of 5. So felt like in the family there was quite a lot of knowledge there anyway. But when it comes to how you're feeling, just friends, and good friends as well, who should always listen to you, and no matter what, even with their parents or not. And I think, like you said, your wife, my wife as well, she was like absolutely amazing throughout the whole thing. So I think if I had any doubts, I'd kind of just sort of lean on her a bit and that. But I didn't feel I needed a massive network of people. I think, I don't know how you all feel about this, when your child comes along, there's almost something instinctively that kicks in that you work through and follow that. And I think if you follow your instinct, you're okay. It's not the same as a maternal instinct. That's quite different, but that's how I dealt with it.
Johnny,
on interesting point, and it actually relates to a comment I wanted to make earlier, because the idea of having scans every week and being able to dig into all of these different challenges that your kid might have probably wasn't the case when you had your kids, for example. And actually, like, giving people that additional layer of anxiety sort of like detaches the reality of it being a very natural process that really ends up where it ends up. And I think similarly to this, right, like, we're in a world where you can consume so much media and you can digest so much content and you can be told so many different things. Actually, it really comes down to how do you feel. And like you say, your instinct really does have to take over, and it does take over at the harder times, and that's natural. But really, I feel like you can drive your anxiety to bubbling if you're over-consuming the how to be a dad or how to be a parent sort of narrative. And talking about books, like we had one book that we kind of just sort of stood by as a bit of a Bible, and that was really good for us. And you kind of have to sort of filter out pretty much everything else.
Sorry, Fabio.
No, yeah. So it was quite. I remember that was quite overwhelming to see loads of opinions around me, friends, family, trying to kind of advise on their opinions, and there's so many things that you can take in and digest, and we both, as a team of two, me and my partner, we decided to take the approach of listen, of course, but try to really distance ourselves from those opinions. And actually we hired a doula, which is a professional that takes you through. I mean, if you can do it, obviously I think it's great, because the opinions that she had at that time, like the opinions that the professional advice that she would give us, was mostly about taking us through the journey of the different phases of birth. And so that was really helpful for me, at least, to kind of have an understanding of what was going on in my partner's body, but also like understanding my role on that whole growth process. And so it was really helpful. I found that invaluable, like really, really good. And he almost put us at ease in the sense of our mindset in terms of being sort of in the same page on what we actually should do. Yeah. And I think that built a strong base for us to become parents after she was born. I think that was quite helpful.
That's interesting. Yeah, that sort of reassurance from a professional.
Yeah, that takes you through questions, right? As opposed to guidelines, and those questions were mostly very revealing. Yeah. People
are quite keen to dart around the answer. So then, if you're hiring someone to tell you the answer, it's probably a bit easier. I totally agree with that. I found like that to be the case in hospitals specifically. You'd ask these straight questions and they'd just sort of give you a bit of a fluffy explanation. I was like, can't you just tell me exactly? Particularly to feeding, actually, for us. In the first, no one's actually telling us how much he's supposed to have, milk-wise. Well, it kind of depends on this now. Just tell me, like, that much. Like 3 times a day. Like, I'm a bit of I just need to know. Just tell me exactly, and we can work that out. I mean, anything. Just anything.
Yeah, and it adds to the pressure, right?
Yeah, totally.
Like I guess, like, if you take that in, and if you take those opinions in, it adds to the pressure of you, like, having to follow a certain thing, where actually, most of this stuff is, very much about instincts. Like, it's very much about the natural way of being. And if you do that, I think it's much easier and better for everyone.
Yeah. So if we sort of fast forward a bit now to the sort of birth and that sort of tricky decision about names. I mean, from my own perspective, my partner and I were both teachers. We'd taught for 10 years. And every name we came up with was linked to a child that had misbehaved in a lesson, or that was a bit of a cheeky, girl or a boy. So it was really difficult. We really struggled with that. I mean, how did you decide on it? Obviously, there's 2 of you, and there's pressures from families as well. How did you make that decision? How did you come up with the names? Rodrigo.
Well, we spent a long time on it. I think everyone did. But again, a friend of ours recommended us an app store, which works a little bit like Tinder. Pretty much, you download, your wife downloads as well, so you both links up, left, right. Yeah, I wanted that one. That one sounds good. So that one matches up with whatever sort of name that we both agreed on.
Nice.
So it's kind of short list the name, and then you just go for it. But nothing of that really helped us, really. So on our decision, there was a name just on my mind for a long time, but I didn't really want to settle down. I'm like, let's see if I find a better name. Because being from another country, another background, I want a name not only that it resonates well here, but also is international. My mum and dad can pronounce it, and all the sort of things. and it doesn't mean something differently on another country, or it's easy to make some fun of it in another language and all of that. So we came up with a very international name. And then when we did was just on the last dinner pre-baby, and we were quite stressed, and I'm like, the baby's going to come next week, so what is the name? I'm like, oh, I've got this name that's always linked around my mind, is this. So when I said Raphael to my wife, she just started bawling out.
Oh.
And so that's how we chose the name.
Yeah.
Oh.
And did you, I mean, obviously, grandparents like to get involved and have their say, and you know, I'm sure some of us might have stories that sort of aren't quite so positive in terms of the opinion of grandparents and things like that. But they obviously loved it.
We tried to keep it secret as much as we could.
Yeah.
I'm like, let's be both of us choosing this, because everything was coming at once, and I'm like, no.
Good for you.
Yeah.
Good for you. How about you, Nick?
A lot less technically advanced than yours. We have an old book, and we're going through that, and I think a bit like you said, you have a name and then just have a connotation to someone from school or someone in a film or something that wasn't any good. So we knew the gender of our daughters, so we narrowed that one down, which helped a lot. Otherwise you'd have to try and pick 2 sets of names. Come up with a few names, and then she was born and just didn't look like the name that that really doesn't fit. And our daughter was named by the midwife, who I think that might have been her thing, whereby we had 2 names and she came up with a name, and you know what, that name's absolutely perfect and stuck with her. So that was my daughter. My son, I found that much more difficult, but as soon as he was born, we just looked at him and a name just came straight away. So again, you can think about it quite a lot, but the one thing I would say to any dad is, have some names ready, have a good look at your baby and see whether they look like a Dave or Steve or something.
That's a really good bit of advice, and I mean, I think my first child was called Jack, and then stupidly named our second child Daniel. So we didn't realise until it was on the birth certificate, Jack Daniels. But you know, it is important to think about those things. But that's a lovely story about the midwife, Johnny.
Yeah, I totally agree with both of those experiences as well. I think it comes down to sort of natural feeling again, which seems to be sort of a common thread through a lot of these answers actually. But for us, I like, wife definitely wears the trousers, so I think leave her to make the ultimate decision. And maybe that was a bit of a play from me, knowing how the relationship goes, because I kind of left her to it. But ultimately she wanted my inclusion, and we ended up naming him after my granddad. So we're talking about granddad inclusion. And my granddad was called Albert, but we call Albert Albie. So a bit more of a kind of like modern twist on the name, I guess. Which we didn't want something too traditional, I guess. He looks like an Albie. Let's go with that. There wasn't too much of a shock.
That's a lovely name. Lovely name, yeah.
And Lucy's Finnish, so his middle name is Vilho, which I can barely pronounce, which was her granddad's name, William.
Yeah, lovely.
So I mean, a bit of a compromise, and I think maybe a bit of a strategy play from me. Just sort of, man, you take care of that.
Well done.
Comes back.
Well done.
I want you included in this. Okay, cool, fine.
Fabian, how about yourself?
So, I mean, out of all of you, probably we did a much more complex process. We're both designers, so my partner is a service designer. So we created an Excel file, and we did a brainstorm and load all the names that we could think of. This was at the stage that we already knew the gender, and then out of that we created a series of parameters where we could evaluate the names, and then we did a preliminary phase where a few names went through, and then we did a testing phase where we went through a week where each of the days we would call the baby that was inside mum's and we would basically test it. We'd just call her and speak to her and all of that. And I remember like cycling to work and shouting my daughter's name. I was just cycling and I would just go like, Amelia, oh, this. And yeah, so actually this is the revealing moment. So my daughter is actually called Emilia with an E. And it works in both languages, and we are quite pleased to, you know, as soon as she was born, she had an Emilia's face, and yeah, it was a very fun process. It was actually it was truly fun. It was actually fun.
Great.
To do the testing was the best part.
Yeah.
Actually, I would do a lot more testing.
Spoken like a true designer. Yeah, that's brilliant.
User testing, isn't it?
So obviously, you know, when first baby arrives or second, third baby, you know, that can affect a relationship between yourself and your partner. You know, I don't know if anyone's happy to talk about how their relationship has been effective. You know, obviously positive or negative in terms of having a couple, you know, having a baby as a couple. I mean, from my point of view, I used to remember really enjoying those sort of nights out with my partner, going to the cinema. We used to go to the Clapham Picture House and watch a sort of arty film, and then go for a pizza. And that sort of finished as soon as Jack arrived. You know, we just weren't able to. We didn't have a network close by, like parents close by to babysit, and you know. So I think we went for about 6 months to a year of not really going out together, and that, you know, that paid a bit of a toll on the relationship. You know, that sort of fun, independent sort of feeling that we had pre-baby, you know, had disappeared. So I don't know whether any of you have got, you know, any other insights or experiences that you'd like to share.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I mean, to jump in, but absolutely. I'd say there are a few people that in Lucy's network who sort of led the baby thing. So there's about 5 babies in her friendship circle that are about a year or so older than Albie, and that really helped with them feeding back to say, you know, you need to invest in your relationship. And that openness and discussion was something that we took pretty seriously. And I totally agree, like actually we sort of reinvented dating again in a way, because like we've been together 10 years and actually dating, even in that time, like fizzles out a little bit, doesn't it? So sort of reinventing the dating thing was really good, because there was a real purpose around it. You know, the babysitter comes over and you actually book somewhere nice, or you go out and properly treat it like something special again, rather than just yet another night. So making a thing of it. We also kind of committed, we've done one so far, but he's only 18 months, to at least a week a year on holiday without the kid. I mean, maybe that's unreasonable if we have more, but again, and totally reliant on support network, right? Like luckily we have grandparents or parents that can help out and are happy to take child for a week, but I think that's important, and committing to that is something that we're keen to do, but let's see how realistic that is.
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember going away without the baby, you know, for a couple of years, and that was tough, even for a weekend, you know, because grandparents were not local, and it was a struggle.
Well, it does feel very unnatural as well. Like when you're there, you're like, this is not right. Yeah. Like we did a long weekend in Seville, and we kind of leaned into it and enjoyed it, but the first 24 hours were really not cool.
We weren't enjoying it.
And I think you kind of like got to get over that pretty quickly. Yeah. Like this is the most irresponsible thing we could ever freaking do. But actually, in hindsight, it was really positive, and actually gave you a lot more of a feeling of, you know, I can leave my child with other people, and not being so neurotic around I must be with them all the time. And I think in looking back on it and looking at other people who've experienced that and being connected to a child, like literally not leaving them for 2 years, it's actually pretty negative, like mentally on an individual of like any sort of you know, stature and ability to stay strong. I would say like that eats you, because you have no social kind of ability beyond baby talk.
Yes. Yes. Yeah, I mean, does anyone else want to add anything to the relationship bit?
I do agree with that. Well, for us, I think all of us, I think our kids are not that old enough, apart from yourself, but we all got a little bit of the lockdown thing effect in there. So we had no option on these rather than reinventing a little bit of dating actually at home. And so we sort of like intentionally trying to do every week or so when the baby goes to sleep, which wasn't that common, and to do like a movies night. But half an hour in, we just end up like falling asleep on the couch. And so we completely failed on that dating aspect of things. But I think if you really invest on your relationship on that, not compromising the baby and all of that, but really so like we need to be well in order for our baby to flourish and all of that. So that is very strong. Even though that we failed on our dating thing, however, somehow I think we just grown a little bit stronger because we had like an extra bonding between ourselves that wasn't just my dedication towards us, but there was something else between us, and that was love that she demonstrated to him that actually was demonstrated to me, and vice versa. So I think that we just took him like, this is actually a proof of love that we are having right here. And so that's what kept us going for the lockdown time. And of course we have to improve on leaving the baby behind for a week. Yeah, we haven't done it yet, but one day.
Nick, do you want to add anything?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple of points what Johnny said. I think it's important for a child to be with other people because the child has to learn how to create its own relationships. So it's really cool with grandparents and friends and siblings come and look after the baby because the baby gets a chance to be with other people. But in regards to my relationship with my wife, I think, it definitely makes it stronger. And you look at that and you're really tight. Don't get me wrong, there's times where, especially if you haven't slept, it can be a bit difficult, but overall it's improved it. And I think one of the things that had to change greatly was you need to accept that it's not so much not going out, but it's the spontaneity of it. Whereas before you have children, you can just do whatever you want. You go on holiday or go out somewhere or do nothing. And that's probably one of the biggest changes. And I think to some extent, and I suffered for it, and certainly friends that I know have suffered from it, is you almost grieve that. You almost grieve your kind of former self, where you could just be anything, anytime. But now, no, life's changed a bit. For the better, but it is certainly a change. That's my take on that.
That's really interesting, yeah. And Fabio, anything?
Just taking a little bit on your point is I think the spontaneity of the moments and trying to convert them almost into rituals. I think it's been a little bit our strategy. The very few moments that we have, we try to make them really special, and the booking part of them, like which is quite funny, and ends up being like, okay, like at that time and that day. And it sounds a bit weird. It's like, oh my God, they have to kind of book it in the calendar. It sounds a bit weird. But how do you actually transform that into actually a thing that you're looking forward? So there's been a bit of a strategy to make up for it in a way and balance out. But it's obviously the relationship is going to change. I mean, even myself, I have to put a part of myself aside for until now. Probably for much longer, and that is a moment of grief, but at the same time is a grief that gives born to something much greater. I feel much more fulfilled nowadays. I live life in a tranquility of like I have accomplished something that I don't even know is maybe this mammal instinct of like, you want the world to to keep your genes alive. And I think that definitely resonates with me, like that actually I've done something that makes me more calm about life, and that kind of helps with our relationship, I guess.
Oh, that's really interesting. Yeah. Thank you. I mean, thank you for sharing that. That's really interesting points of view, on how relationships have changed, and sounds like, mainly for the best, really. It's as a dad, I mean, it's probably quite different than for mums. Have you experienced sort of anything that's been tricky, or anything that's been amusing whilst you've been out with your baby on your own? I mean, one example I'll give is, I remember when Jack was born, probably about 6 months old he was, I went, for some reason, I went to an art gallery with him in a baby sling, and halfway around I needed the loo. So there's in the gents' toilets, there's no way you can put a baby. So I had him in my sling and I went into the sort of cubicle, had a wee, and Jack woke up and started giggling really loudly. It was so embarrassing. And somebody was at the urinal just said, "Somebody's having fun in there," and it was just my son giggling uncontrollably whilst I was having a wee. And I found that really, it was really amusing, but also it sort of brought home that actually sometimes things aren't really set up for dads in that respect. So I don't know whether you have any sort of anecdotes or points you'd like to raise that have been difficult or amusing along the way.
You experienced that back then, that you didn't have facilities to change your baby on a male's toilet. So, and I think majority of the places is still the case, whereby so many times I go to restaurants and then go to the toilet with him to change, before, and then I had to go back and say, "Sorry, baby, would you mind to go?" Because there is no changing room on the male side. That needs to be on the female side, so she needs to get up and do herself. But just going back to your question, I think it wasn't on the baby side, but it was last week. I took him out. He's just finished the potty training now, and then so we took to Richmond Park for a walk and all of that. Look at the deers, and then suddenly he just looked at me like confused, and I thought, "You're getting red. Why?" "I want a wee." And I'm like, "Okay, I didn't bring the portable potty or anything like that, but I need a wee, Dad." And I'm like, "Okay, that's in the middle of the field. Put your pants down. Let me teach you something else." So right then was the first lesson that I said, like, you can actually wee like this. So yeah, it was quite funny. So I told the wife, and the wife said, "I can't believe you just told him that." So yeah.
Sport the potty training there and then. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, that obviously, I think this must be a shared thing, is you go out and you either have to go into the disabled toilet or once into the female, which didn't feel right, but nevertheless needs must. So did that. I always quite enjoyed, well, still do, I always quite enjoyed taking our children out when we were young. Two things spring to mind. I took my son and daughter swimming and saw someone. I think it was my son's, it wasn't his first time swimming, but he certainly couldn't swim. And I saw someone, and I'd been in the pool for no more than seconds. And they're like, "Who are you here with?" And I was like, "My son," who was then sort of face down in the water. So yeah, always be vigilant no matter what you do and where you go. So that was the one thing that sprung to mind with that. I think the other thing was the amount of kit, if that's the right way, you would have to take out. And I think the first time I went out, it felt like I was going on an expedition. And the next time I went out, I only took half of it, most of that not intentionally, but forgot it, and then realised I didn't need it. You don't need lots of equipment to look after a baby when you're out, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think we were talking about this earlier. Obviously baby showers are a big thing. Everyone having a list and buying everything, every bit of kit, and obviously my company produces gadgets, so we're hoping people buy gadgets, but really you need to wait for a lot of it. Apart from the essentials, it's a question of waiting, isn't it? Waiting to see, do you need that? I think we've all probably wasted hundreds, if not thousands of pounds on bits of baby kit that actually we hardly use, but yeah, that's good insight.
Yeah, probably a bit of a dad role there as well, like buying gear. You feel like you take some responsibility for that. Yeah, like completely overbuying gear. I think like it drops off a cliff, doesn't it? The amount of gear needed. I mean, the first 3 months like mega gear, and then you're walking out with like a little bag, or you've stuffed a few extra bits in your own bag or something like that. Trying to think of something specific to myself, but it kind of linked, I guess, because two stories. We found out that Albie has a sesame allergy, and two stories related. One was my mum, who fed him like tubs of hummus before we got on a flight to go to Greece, and woke up next morning, and when they strap you on top of you, and he was 6 months old, and like we're going into detail here, but like the poo came out the back of his nappy and just sort of volcanoed like all over me, and his dad was just like, you've got to stay seated, please, stay seated. And I'm like, what do I do? She's just chucking blue roll at me, and it was just everywhere, and then everyone's turning around and looking at you, and you're then that person that everyone's saying, God, you've really screwed it up there. But there's no shame really once you're a parent, is there?
Absolutely.
And, so no problem at all. And I had the same hummus experience before that, but we hadn't told my mum, and that was just me on my own, which was really scary actually, because I gave him some hummus, and then we went out. Probably really should have told my mum not to do hummus. The poo volcano is probably like my own problem. But I was completely on my. Lucy had gone away with friends and taken him out for a walk, and he's very, very silent in the pram. And then I go like turn around to sort of see if he's all right, and his whole face was red and this huge rash all over his face. And luckily it was more just sort of a digestion thing. Hence the volcano story. But he put hummus all over his face as well, so it's just like his whole face just got red. Nothing anaphylactic, luckily, but you still panic. You're like, I was ringing up my GP, godparent. I was like, ringing 111. You were full ball panic at that stage. But totally fine.
Oh, glad it was just the hummus.
Yeah. Be careful with hummus.
Yeah. Good tip. Fabio.
Me and my partner, we give quite a lot of autonomy to our daughter. We try to kind of give her the chance of exploring on her own and stuff like that. We live near Clissold Park, which is a park in East London, and there was this day in the summer that I went with her on my own, put a blanket on the floor, and just started chatting with my parents, her grandparents, and then shared the phone with her. And then she's basically, looking at them, drops the phone on the floor. I pick up the phone and I keep chatting with them. And then my daughter just walks on like normal situation. And I keep talking with my parents, and that's probably like a matter of like maybe less than 5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes or something. And I don't see my daughter anymore. And I just see this dog, and my daughter is on the floor, the dog is on top of her, and I just hear her giggling, and it's the dog basically licking her face, and she's like the happiest child in the world. I was like, wow, this is like, this is the moment.
Yeah.
And I was like, very irresponsible of me, but it was a lesson, like things can happen really fast, and I was quite lucky. But yeah, my daughter is very confident with animals and dogs, cats, other animals as well. And she usually puts, like, there's one thing that she does, she offers up her head for the leaking time. So and it's something that she carry on doing until now. And this was like maybe when she started, maybe 2 or 3 months down the line, and she started walking. And so nowadays that she walks everywhere, she just hugs dogs like with the most confidence.
Wow.
And yeah, some people get surprised on. We don't even have a dog. So there was a moment of maybe like panic and fun.
But turned out well in the end.
Yeah.
That's so. just thinking about sort of workplace, and as sort of working dads, taking paternity leave. I mean, back 25 years ago, I think I had 2 days off, and then my employer was very much sort of saying, when are you coming back to work? We need you to be teaching. And that was it. I wasn't able to sort of take more time off later. Obviously, as a teacher, I had holidays, which were fantastic, and used to have, because both my partner and I were teachers, we used to take the children on holidays, camping and such like. But, a lot of you are sort of, may only have 4 or 5 weeks holiday a year. Were you able to take paternity leave? Was there any, I mean, you may not wish to reveal this, but, was there any pressure for you to get back to work? Were you able to take it at a later date? How did that work for you, Rodrigo?
Well, I had 2 weeks, a little bit more than you had, but that 2 weeks is not enough at all for you to especially even trying to bond with your child. 2 weeks is just for you trying to figure out what you're going to do from now on. And I remember doing that weeks, and I was getting phone calls from work, and not like, when you're coming back, but it's like, hey, can you give us an advice on these and that? So that is just like adds a little bit of like anxiety on those things, because you're trying to juggle so much. But I think I was a little bit fortunate. I think we all were. After 6 months, pandemic hit, lockdown. So that was a time I feel really blessed for the pandemic, because that was the time that I had to work from home and see my child grow, and actually spend that time and bond a little bit with him. But if it wasn't for the lockdown itself, I'm not sure how that would be, because 2 weeks is nothing really.
No. How about you, Nick?
Yeah, it's 2 weeks. My employers are really good about it, but one memory from that is the 2 weeks were great, and then the first day you go back to work, I'm pretty sure I was close to tears driving to work. So, oh God, right, you've got to go back and do that. But it works out and it becomes normal. And I think, like you said about lockdown, yeah, it's absolutely amazing. You get to spend all that time with your children. I think that's one thing I've absolutely learned about being a dad is it's not really about material possessions, it's about just being there, just your time and so. But yeah, in regards to paternity leave, I think that is a bit more mainstream now. Taking a couple of weeks, is it enough? Like, absolutely not. But it's like most things, it's a balance. You have to work and make it work.
Yeah. How about you, Johnny? What was you?
Yeah, 2 weeks as well. Totally agree with that. I think, coming back, many people who haven't had kids, some who have, and for the majority, it's like, the equivalent of a long holiday. It's like, it certainly wasn't a holiday, and it's a life-changing moment, and straight back to normal Monday, 9 o'clock or whatever the day is that you come back. There's a bit of like leniency from my business generally around the dates anyway, of like gearing up to it and gearing down from it, as it were. So that was super good. Totally agree on the lockdown comments. And I think generally it's the challenge of small business versus big business, right? There's some amazing corporates. My brother's currently on 3 months paternity leave. Their kid is now 9 months old, so they've delayed it and they've done a kind of like shared parental thing. And having the ability to be able to offer that absolutely levels the playing field for how society should be looking at it. But not having that as an option just takes it off the table, right? Like you can't just take unpaid leave, probably at the most challenging time for you wanting to feel secure in your finances and everything else, right? And I look at Lucy's near network of friends, and many of them have been probably forced not to go back to work in the short term. I think they will at some point, but bring into like the realm of like nursery, which I know the government is sort of looking to address now, or at least into the next budget. But right now, if you're not earning X in London, average cost of nursery is 1,500 quid a month, more than 1,600 quid a month, and that just is crazy. It's crazy money on top of a mortgage and everything else, and it just makes working near pointless. When it comes to your point of like, you know, best time is the time you're being there, and you know,
and that has a bigger impact on how big your family might be as well, I suppose.
Totally.
You know, you're having to make those decisions based on finances, you know, rather than what you really want. And that's
nursery doesn't stop either. It's not like term time nursery. That's like every month nursery.
That's
it's brutal
incredible
stuff. But it absolutely needs to be addressed. And even 2 weeks, right? It's nowhere near. And it's funny that we consider that generous from your experience to where we are now, right?
It was, you know, and there was lots of pressure as well. I think there's a lot of pressure on mums, you know, if a child's ill, there's still that sort of mindset that the mum should take the time off, you know, and there's the pressure on the dad that they can't do that. I remember feeling that, you know, and actually going to see my boss at the time and saying, look, you know, it's not fair. My wife's had to take time off because our son's been ill. You know, I really need to take some time off to be with him at home, and there was a lot of pressure not to.
It's having the option to make the choice. Like Lucy earns a very similar amount to me, and that choice needs to be our choice, not our employer's choice, I would say, right? Like the option for Lucy to take extended maternity leave, I think she got 6 months, 5 months paid. She took 5 months paid to an extension of 6 with holiday. She ended up taking a year. Like that was good. That was a great option for her. Like, nowhere near that option for me. It's 2 weeks is what it is, right? So you're going unpaid into that. Arguably, I could have done that 6-monthy bit that she did at the back end, but that continuation kind of made sense to us. So it's just having the choice. Like you give it to us as a kind of fair, comparable decision to be able to make yourself, rather than set the ground rules as an unbalanced option, because then it's only one option if it's unbalanced, right?
Absolutely, yeah. Fabio, you?
Yeah, so I'm a self-employed, so I decided to make a compromise on the business and just keep things afloat. In the initial period, I would probably do a couple of hours per day. Even in the first few days, I'll just literally, you know, pick up emails, and I manage a small team, and so I would basically delegate as much work as I could. I mean, it obviously impacted massively the business, even until around today, maybe. But that was a good compromise. It was the only time that actually makes it a lot of sense to make a compromise on your other baby. You know, my company is one baby, but this other baby is something much more important. So it was unquestionable, like about, you know, how to compromise that, and yeah, nowadays I balanced it much better, but I had to learn, and I went from basically working from 9 to 11 to work to work from 9 to 5, and it's like, wow, there's a big difference. You know, being more optimize your time, be more consistent, and all of that. Just, I guess it also helps you as a human being become more, I guess, organized and balance out your work-life balance and get that right.
It's really nice to hear the perspective of somebody who is self-employed rather than employed, and how you still have those challenges. You know, it's not a question of I can just take as much time as I need. No, you know, because it has a massive impact on your business, and it's very tricky. I mean, I think if we could just finish off with, you know, just a short one piece of advice that you would give any dads to be that might be watching this. Maybe it's some advice you were given, or maybe it's something you've just gleaned from your own experience. So with Rodrigo.
I would say the anxieties that anyone could probably feel may not be the thing that's happening. So it might be toned down when the baby arrives. So don't amplify those anxieties, and enjoy every time. Any time that you have with your child, enjoy, because it goes very quick, very fast, and spend time on if you're married or you've got a partner, spend time with them and support them in whatever they need. And friends around to support you whenever you're in the low moments, because sleep deprivation is real. So when you are there, your friends are there to pick you up.
Yeah, lovely. Nick?
I'm not sure I can add much to that. As I've said, being present is the one thing, and as we've touched upon earlier in our discussion, like, go off your instincts, turn off all the noise from external sources, other people and so forth, and just go with how you feel, because it's in us all to be parents. You just got to kind of find it. And we go back, hundreds of years, children were born in caves, with no equipment, nothing, and people were okay. So we live in a society in a time these days where a child's going to be quite well provided for, I'd have thought. And like you said, enjoy just every moment of it.
Lovely. Yeah, Johnny?
Yeah, I think cave point is great, actually. I love that a lot, because they're going to survive. Like, most of your anxiety is around, are they going to kill themselves by doing something silly that you're responsible for? And probably not is the best way to look at it. And actually, you being constantly anxious about what thing that they could bang their head on, or what thing they could trip over, or what thing they could eat, is highly likely that's not going to happen, and it will negatively impact your enjoyment in the moment. And that's so easy to say in hindsight, right? Because we were all there worrying about the thing they were going to swallow and blah, 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 blah. But I think you lean into that a lot more as you get further into it, right? It massively decreases over time.
Absolutely.
And if you could do that on day one, you'd be superhuman. It's impossible. It's supernatural to feel that way. But to be able to kind of get to that point very quickly, and I think a step change for us, I talked about it earlier, but being able to get a babysitter when they're young and leave the house even for a bit, or leave them with a grandparent, leave them with other people, was a really great detachment piece for us, which allowed us to understand that they're a human and they live their own life, not us kind of smothering their being and who they are. And it's kind of both good for the parent, but also really good for the kid.
I think that's spot on. And going back to your point about they will be okay. I mean, I think having had 3 of my own children, baby number 1, yes, those anxieties about what are they eating, what are they going to bang their heads on and such were really heightened. By baby 3, you were so busy looking after the whole family that they had to be left to their own devices a lot more, and they were fine and well balanced because of that, probably. So, Fabio.
So yesterday I was home with my daughter alone, and actually my partner is currently for a week in Chicago, so I'm just me and my daughter. And my daughter was having difficulties in falling asleep, and she said that she wanted to go to my bedroom. And I was so upset because it was already super late, and I just actually had the bed sheets out of the duvet and everything, and I had to get that all ready, and the momentum of her falling to sleep was passing by, and I was getting so upset and all of that. And then I remember the tagline. I don't know, I can't refer where exactly I listened to it, but I just thought of it, and I was like, wow, that makes a lot of sense. Which was, when you are at these moments very upset, just think about yourself when you are 6 years old and look back at these moments and have a laugh. And it was like, that makes a lot of sense. And I was just enjoying myself by looking at how ridiculous I was being, and just kind of enjoy the situation. You're just putting the bed together with your daughter half falling asleep. It's kind of funny in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. That's a lovely way to end the discussion, and thanks so much for joining me today.
Great, thank you.
Thanks for having us.